I am Morgan Murray,
Michael Bedner.
and we are here to tell you about civil rights and how it was successful.
That's right, Morgan. So, the 1960s were turbulent times. It was good plus bad, like, a normal day. Protests of the Vietnam War, we got new music, new ideas coming out. Americans seem to be rebelling against the 50s, the ideas of the 50s and stuff. The young Americans demanded social change. Young President Kennedy was assassinated. Many had seen him as the agent of change, like the face of it. Like, without him, it wouldn't have changed. America was divided in so many ways: young versus old, liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican, old versus new, and of course, black versus white. Today we will discuss the last division. The civil rights movement sought to bring about racial equality, but didn't. Quote from Henry David Thoreau: "Government never of itself further enterprise. It does not keep the country safe, free. It does not settle the West. It does not educate. The character within the American people has done all that has been accomplished, and it would have done somewhat more if the government had not sometimes got in its way."
Alright, according to Thoreau, government has done little to change the course of history. Thoreau, a transcendentalist, believed that all change came from the inherent goodness in human nature. He believed that the government was a barrier to positive change. Would America have initiated positive social and racial change without government interference? Many today feel that the process would be slower without government help. Some, however, feel that the civil rights programs of the 60s have not been helpful. History will be the judge. What was the status of African Americans through the 1950s and 60s, Mike?
Well, statuses were DiGiorno segregation, Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. So, literacy tests, poll taxes, Jim Crow laws, everything that stopped blacks from doing what most white could do. Plus, de facto segregation, which was discrimination, racism, etc., etc. Morgan, how did Martin Luther King Jr. seek to bring about racial equality?
Well, for starters, nonviolent resistance, direct action involving boycotts, sit-ins, mass meetings, and voting. And in the 1955 to the 56, boycotting of Montgomery, Alabama bus system led by Rosa Parks. 1960 to 63, sit-ins at lunch counters. 1963, March on Washington, I Have a Dream speech.
Well, Morgan, how successful was the civil rights movement? Truly, how was it successful?
I'd have to say it was pretty successful, Mike.
Well, Morgan, today we're going to explain how it was successful. We got Brown versus Board of Education, overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, and ended separate but equal segregation. We're going to talk about 24th Amendment, which outlawed, of course, all the stuff that stopped blacks from voting, Civil Rights Act of 1964, and, of course, the Voting Rights Act.
Alright, so to start this off, the 1954 Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education represented a turning point, reversing the 1896 separate but equal ruling. The court held that compulsory segregation in public schools denies black children equal protection under the law. It later directed that segregation educational facilities be furnished with all deliberate speed. A state law against racial intermarriage was also ruled invalid. Now, moving on to the 24th Amendment. The law suspended use of literacy or other voter qualification tests that had sometimes served to keep blacks off voting lists.
Now, Civil Rights Act of 1964. The U.S. Commission of Civil Rights and authorized the U.S. Attorney General to enforce voting rights. So they had to enforce it to make sure, it got there. 1960, legislation was strengthened, and in 1964, a more sweeping civil rights bill outlawed racial discrimination in public accommodations and by employers, unions, and voting registration, deciding that normal judicial procedures were too slow in ensuring minority registration and voting. Congress passed a voting rights bill in 1965. Law suspended and amended later banned use of literacy or other voting qualification tests that had sometimes served to keep blacks off voting lists. Authorized appointment of federal voting examiners in areas not meeting certain voter participation requirements, which meant they had people in there watching, making sure that the blacks were getting what they deserve, voting rights, making sure the South, or anywhere to be, fair, wasn't stopping them from voting. And of course, the Voting Rights Act. The act was a follow-up to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and it outlawed. So normally, it was banned, make sure, they, made sure they would do it. But this outlawed the tests and made sure that it wasn't going to happen again.
All right. I think that about wraps it up, Mike.
Yeah, I think we did a pretty good job. We whatever that word is, we did a good job on explaining it. That's the right word. We explained it perfectly fine.
That we did. All right. Goodbye.
Good day.